What is up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and today we are going to rank the albums of death. And hey, if you like to be kept up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. Alright, so this has been a long requested list and should be an interesting one to hear your reactions from, because despite hearing plenty of death and about death over the years, I had never actually sat down and listened to a full record before doing this. No real reason, just never had a friend growing up that was into them so much that they played them for me, so I kind of skipped over it. So I'm hoping my list will actually be somewhat of a unique perspective as somebody listening to these for the first time, but let's jump right into it with Scream Bloody Gore in 1987, and obviously considered by many to be like the first true death metal record. Chuck did basically everything on this one, which is pretty impressive to think about, especially considering like what was available at the time and how this was such a kind of game changer. But we did have Chris Reifert doing the drums, so I kind of wish I could have been around to see the reaction at the time. But as far as my reactions, I love the horror movie references to like the Beyond, Zombie, City of the Dead. I love the aesthetic of the artwork. It's just amazing. It's iconic. And then of course the music. Bangers, y'all. Bangers. Great D beat, just ragers on here. Lots of like kind of punk energy in a lot of the drumming. I love the jangly guitar sound. Personal favorites, Infernal Death. I love the great atmosphere in the intro to Zombie Ritual. Mutilation is just a bulldozer of a track. Not a dud in sight, really. All around just a great package. Starting off strong. Very impressive for a debut. I gotta give this thing S tier. Across the board, there's a lot of reason to give it those marks, but this was definitely one that I listened to it, I went to the Discord, and immediately my response was, well, that was a fucking banger, and it is. But let's move on to 1988 with Leprosy. Lineup, I'm going to do a lineup check each album because there are quite a few changes over the years. So this one is Chuck, with Rick Ross on lead guitar and Bill Andrews on drums. Another great opening on this one with the title track. More bangers here. Pull the Plug, Primitive Ways in particular stood out to me. I initially listened to these albums back to back, and it almost feels like a part one and part two with some slight changes in the songwriting. There are some more, I feel like, slower parts on this one, more dynamics on tracks like Open Casket and Choke on It. Initially, I'd say it didn't grip me as much as the debut or as immediately, but it's damn close and a very consistent album. The top tier ones I kind of like could shuffle around, and it took me a while to really settle them into my place. I really didn't want more than two in any tier too, and I want to differentiate them too. So understand there are going to be albums that are in like a grade that maybe they wouldn't normally be in. I'm going to go ahead and put Leprosy at A tier, very close to S tier though. But yeah, like I said, there's going to be some albums in B and C tier just to separate them out and make them ranked a little bit more. That doesn't mean that I would have graded those albums a C if it was just like an individual album review. All right, then we have Spiritual Healing in 1990. Lineup here is Chuck with James Murphy on guitar, Terry Butler on bass, and Bill Andrews on drums. Shifting the lyrics here from horror to more like societal stuff. It was interesting reading up on the history of this one because apparently Butler and Andrews went on tour this cycle with Louis Carasales instead of Chuck. So it's hard to picture a death tour without Chuck, but Chuck didn't like that. He didn't want to go because I guess the tour he thought was badly organized, and so ultimately they were dismissed from the band. This is from the wiki, so you all can correct me if that is not accurate, but it's pretty wild to think about. I definitely hear a difference in the vocals on this one. I think it's like a production choice. It has this weird like doubled effect, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. I think overall I'm not a big fan of it. It sort of like is distracting to me in a way. It's interesting, but it's distracting. This also feels like a less discussed album. Like most of these other albums were pretty familiar to me, even just by like seeing the cover and hearing the name. But I feel like I just haven't, for whatever reason, come across as many people who discuss this one, but it's still pretty solid. I mean, I will say to the end here that even the so-called worst albums of Death are really still strong. Like, they have a very consistent discography. I like Living Monstrosity, again, hearing the increased finesse coming through in the songwriting, but also a little bit more meandering at this point. I'm a little bored in places where I'm kind of like feeling the desire to hit the skip. I made sure I listened to it all the way through. I'm sorry if that's upsetting, but again, it's definitely not bad by any means. I also enjoy Low Life. Got a great, like, doomy, kind of classic doomy hook on this one to break up the faster parts. Genetic Reconstruction is kind of interesting. Very cool drumming on that one. Ultimately, though, I'm going to give it a C. Put it on the lower end of their discography. Then we have another big one here with Human in 1991 with the lineup of Chuck Paul Masvidal on lead guitar, who is also of Cynic, Steve DiGiorgio, and Sean Reinhardt on drums. Major part of the development of the technical death metal scene, and you hear it through and through. Like, I was listening to this album and was like, oh yeah, I can see how this launched a million tech death bands who aped this style, and some of them improving on the formula too, but more on that later. This is also apparently their best-selling album, again according to the wiki. More introspective lyrics on this one, becoming a little bit more personal, and I definitely hear this as being like the biggest shift in their sound between albums right from the beginning. Like, this is definitely a different animal. I put this on, I was like, oh wow, this is like almost a different band, it feels like. I do like a lot of the changes. The vocals sound a lot better on this album too. They dropped that weird effect. In fact, that's the only album that I noticed it on. Maybe it was just the copy I was listening to. I don't know. But I can hear the influence on a lot of tech death bands here. Instrumentation is definitely impressive, but, and this is a big but, and this might be hard for some people to hear because I know this is like a beloved album. But I will say I feel like it's a little bit lacking in terms of personality, I think. Like, maybe kind of a style over substance issue. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's a problem that a lot of tech death albums honestly run into. So it sort of makes sense that they would copy this and run into that issue. I also find it a little bit ironic that the album is called Human when it feels sort of the least human to me. And it did improve on later listens. Like, I enjoyed it later down the line. I still think it's a very strong album. I get why it's highly respected. I'm sure if I was there when this album came out back in the day and this type of music did not exist, I would have been absolutely floored. But having the context of listening to a lot of technical and progressive death metal over the years, it didn't quite stack up for me. I think it could use a little bit more heart, and again, this is just my like subjective perspective as somebody who is jumping in new. I also feel like some of the songwriting can be a little bit meandering, and yeah, again, I'm sure this was earth-shattering at the time, but nowadays there's just so many other options and examples of, in my opinion, this style taken and improved upon. So all that said, I know a lot of people would put this at S tier or at least A tier. I'm going to put it at B tier. It definitely deserves a ton of respect and the renown that it has. And it's just, as far as re-listenability and the albums from Death that I enjoyed the most and want to re-listen to, it didn't quite make the top rankings. All right, then we have Individual Thought Patterns in 1993. Lineup here is Chuck with Andy LaRocque on guitar, Steve DiGiorgio on fretless bass, and Gene motherfucking Hoglan on drums, and also doing some guitars apparently on The Exorcist. I really enjoyed this record. It feels like they're putting more of those straight speed elements from their earlier albums back into it, while also melding that into the more technical and melodic parts that they've been developing over the years at this point. It's sort of the best of both worlds, if you ask me. I really enjoy the constantly shifting sound and the solo on Overactive Imagination. Definitely hearing more of that personality that I was looking for in Human. It feels like a lot of the things that I did like about that album are re-represented here, but in stronger songs that I find to be more engaging. So not sure if this is an unpopular opinion, but I actually like this better. And given the rock solid lineup, I mean, can you really blame me? I think there's a lot of Great stuff happening here from a lot of talented musicians. Some of the guitars in certain places remind me of Dark Tranquillity's The Gallery, which is probably another reason why I enjoy it, because I am a huge Dark Tranquillity fan. Mentally Blind is great. Very strong. Honestly, my favorite of this more technical phase, and another one that I had an immediate response to, and it only got better with subsequent listens. So, yeah, I don't know if this is going to be a strange choice, but I'm going to put this one at S tier right alongside Scream Bloody Gore. All right, another one though. Get ready, y'all. So we got Symbolic in 1995. Lineup check here is Chuck, Bobby Coble on guitar, Kelly Conlon on bass, and Gene Hoglan again on drums. Different production sound on this one. Feels kind of like thinner to me. I don't think it sounds as good as the previous albums. The opening also feels a little bit weaker to me in comparison to past records. I shouldn't be bored on the first track, but I'll be a little bit harsh here and say that I was. Now, again, this is just my personal opinion. This is not me saying that this is a bad record. It's just that personally, I wasn't really making a connection with this one. I think I have similar issues I had with Human, but without the stronger performances. There's lots of like slower, doomier segments, which is just not really my thing, as my regular viewers know. Nothing wrong with it. It's just, yeah, I don't connect with that style as much. Crystal Mountain is a really cool track, but again, this may be harsh and a very unpopular opinion, it seems, from what I was seeing in terms of other people's rankings and their thoughts on this album. Another highly lauded album, but I am just bored with most of it. I really tried. I put all my focus into it. I tried listening to it in different contexts, but no matter what, I was just kind of like, I'm not really into it. I'm not really into it. It's the most visceral negative reaction I actually had to any of the albums. So I know y'all are going to rip me to shreds for this in the comments, but it wouldn't be a Trenches tier list without at least one hot take, and here's mine. This was my least favorite Death album. I'm not going to put it at D tier or anything, but I am going to put it at the end of C tier. Yes, even after Spiritual Healing. If you're mad, stay mad.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
All right, but that brings us to The Sound of Perseverance in 1998. Final lineup here, Chuck with Shannon Ham on guitar, Scott Clendenin on bass, and Richard Christie on drums. This is obviously their final album. There's also an implication, I guess, that some of the songs were originally meant for Chuck's other project, Control Denied, but ended up on here. Highly lauded, and for good reason. Like, this is how you open an album. This thing kicked way into high gear right away. I like the kind of exotic sounding melodies in certain areas too, still evolving their sound to the very end. Lots of big, powerful riffs, which align with that album title. I love Spirit Crusher. That was definitely one of my favorites. I like Flesh and the Power It Holds, which is a little bit overlong, but still a fantastic song. And just in general, all of the great like progressive songwriting really going on front and center of this one. One of their better examples of being able to harness that, even if it's not perfect, I would say. Voice of the Soul, bringing that crisp acoustic guitar sound too to break things up. It's not my personal favorite, but at least worthy of an A. Very strong album. And again, these top four in particular, like I had to kind of like spend more time with them in particular and decide which ones were going to make the top and which ones weren't. Because again, I didn't want more than 2 albums on a tier, and especially S tier I like to reserve for just the tippy top. And so, yeah, those are my album rankings. Yeah, aside from commenting, hitting like on the video if you enjoyed it, stick around, don't go anywhere, because I have plenty more videos for you to check out. I have a whole playlist of these tier lists, and I also have ones I did not too long ago on Cannibal Corpse, for instance. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.